Every bit of this was entirely beyond my comprehension from the very start. 11 years ago, I completed my college education and returned to my hometown after self-financing my studies. Due to self-funding, I didn't receive any financial support. Nevertheless, I obtained the right to free employment and landed a respectable, well-paying job. As I built a successful career, I often had to travel to the regional center, where I once ran into my fellow student Earl. We weren't close pals, but we consistently had enjoyable conversations. Earl eventually assisted me, and the approvals, which took weeks, were secured. One day, Earl suddenly became the CEO of the company founded by his wife Zara's parents. It was at a friendly gathering at Earl's place that I met my future wife Layla. Layla was wrapping up her university studies and residing with her retired parents in the city center. Somehow, we started dating. Our relationship heated up, and after 6 months, realizing Layla was pregnant, I proposed to her. She accepted on the condition that I move to the regional center. I agreed, and we had a wedding attended by Earl and his wife Zara. Layla's parents generously gifted us a 3-bedroom apartment inherited from her mother-in-law's sister, which was registered under Layla's name. We had a son, and soon after, Layla became pregnant again and gave birth to a daughter. I, based on Gerald's recommendation, secured a job with a highly reputable organization. There, I quickly established myself as a knowledgeable specialist. Unsurprisingly, the company led by Earl was given priority in selecting contractors for construction projects, especially when I represented the client. Work was thriving, and earnings were outstanding. 10 years passed, and our son was about to start 4th grade, while our daughter was entering the 2nd grade. 2 weeks ago, I sat in a hotel's conference room. The negotiations were intense and dragging on, so they called for a break. I went out with one of the representatives from the Capitol to the conference room's balcony and took a seat at a table. The representative, observing the hotel visitors in the lobby, remarked about how many years had passed, and how Earl was still in love with his wife and happily married, even though old habits die hard. Earl, who was over at the reception desk checking out, was with his girlfriend by the kiosk. I noticed Earl at the front desk with his wife Layla at the kiosk. Earl finished checking out, and they both walked to the elevator. At first, my immediate impulse was to locate them and confront Earl physically. However, I realized that such an action would lead to failed negotiations, a public brawl, and a possible divorce. I pondered the sound I heard in my ears. It had been years. I turned to the person I was conversing with. I inquired about how long the person had known him, and they responded that they had known him for a long time. They mentioned being a local resident and living in the area for years. Earl had met his current wife, Zara, after college. According to the person, Zara came from a well-off family, with her father being an entrepreneur who had founded several businesses with his wife. Earl had married Zara and had quickly assumed the role of CEO in one of the companies. However, the person mentioned avoiding any business dealings with Earl due to his unreliability and lack of trustworthiness. Once the negotiations were concluded and the contract was signed, I returned to my office. I sat at my desk and began contemplating my next steps. It was evident that I needed to part ways with my wife. However, I also needed to ensure my role as a father to our children. I had to secure a place to live. After our divorce, the apartment we resided in was gifted to us by Layla's parents, with the property deed in her name. So the best course of action was to return to my parents' house, which, God willing, had 2 floors, with the 2nd floor unused. Layla had never visited my hometown, expressing reservations about what she would do there. The departure was a decision I had to arrange, ensuring I didn't break my promise to take the children to the seaside this year and avoiding deceiving them. With a plan in mind, I began to put it into action. I was well aware of Earl and his wife's routines. I knew that Zara typically went to a cafe located away from their workplaces for lunch, believing that the food there was superior. She had invited me and Layla to dine there multiple times. Now I understood why Layla never visited that cafe and why Earl never frequented it either. The following day, I entered the cafe and spotted Zara. I sat down at her table. She greeted me, and I inquired if she was trying out the local cuisine. She replied that she didn't just decide to try the local food, and I asked about Earl. She confirmed that it was indeed about Earl and Layla. I shared that I had suspected him for a long time, but I couldn't prove it, as he was always home on time. Zara inquired about where I had caught them, and I explained that it was at a hotel downtown, where he had a friend working as a director. Zara asked how long they had been dating, and I informed her that they started dating before I met Layla. She expressed her dismay, mentioning how Earl had introduced Layla to her as a friend of mine. I mentioned that I took a DNA test to be sure about the kids, and Zara shared that Earl was unable to have children due to treatment that had not produced any results. She expressed her desire to have kids. We discussed our plans, and I mentioned that I intended to divorce Layla and change my last name. Zara planned to divorce Earl but wanted concrete evidence. We discussed the idea of setting up webcams to catch them in the act, and I agreed to keep in touch about the plan. I explained that I needed to return home since Layla owned the apartment, and Zara offered to talk to her father about helping me find a place to live. We agreed to set a date for further discussion. In the following days, I prepared for my upcoming separation from my wife. I informed the school about our plans to move and transfer the kids to a new school in a different city. I had to obtain confirmation of the kids' enrollment in the new school during working hours, and the necessary documents were provided. Zara called and asked for passports to obtain visas for a trip to Italy, the city of Pizarro. The visas were quickly obtained. Soon, she told me that she had spoken to her father about Jason and his job at the new branch. Her father conducted a background check and approved it, asking her to come in for an interview. After the conversation with Zara's father, where they arranged his position and salary, I spoke to my boss about the situation. My boss, who had been divorced twice before, asked how he could help. I explained that I needed a quiet vacation and to be let go from my job. I inquired if there was a way to work it out. My boss considered it and eventually agreed. The preparations for the separation were finalized. I told Layla about my upcoming business trip, which would only last 3 or 4 days. On the same day, Layla informed her husband, Earl, about my departure, and he was happy about it. He mentioned that his wife was spending 2 weeks at a sanatorium. She asked about my plans for the kids, and I explained that I would take them to my parents' place, since it was vacation time and they couldn't stay at home. Layla expressed her frustration about having a baby, mentioning that she couldn't have children and suggesting I hire a nanny or rely on my husband. We discussed our plan for the next day, with Layla mentioning that Vovka would be leaving in the morning. I packed my travel bag, said goodbye to Layla, and headed to the train station, though I actually just took a shuttle bus 1 stop away. My hired car for long-distance moving was waiting there, and we drove to my house, where I saw Layla taking the children and getting into a cab with them, heading to her parents' house. Half an hour later, Layla arrived at her mother's house, telling her she had brought the grandchildren and asked when they could go to the sea. She promised to call every night and then got into a waiting cab to go to work. Meanwhile, I packed up the house, putting everything in the cardboard boxes. The boxes were immediately loaded into the car, and within an hour and a half, everything was packed and ready. Only a large suitcase and 2 bags were packed separately. After packing the car, I called my father and told him that the movers were on their way to his place, and I would join them in a month. Layla, on the other hand, informed the CEO that I had left and the kids were with her grandparents, so she was free until Monday. The CEO agreed to let her leave an hour early. After working most of the day, Layla signed out early, claiming to attend a meeting with a customer. She left the office, and shortly after, Earl left as well, driving away. Zara, who had placed a tracker and microphone in the car, noticed that it had started moving around the city and saw the car turn into an alley and stop. The door closed, and there was an immediate sound. Layla mentioned that we needed to go to the store, and Earl replied that we had everything at home. Around the same time, I stopped by my in-laws' house and informed them that I was picking up the kids. As Layla had told them, the kids would stay with them for 3 or 4 days. They decided to celebrate their 10th wedding anniversary and had a surprise planned for Layla. 10 minutes later, I and the kids headed to the airport, with our flight scheduled for 2 hours later. Layla entered Earl's kitchen, checked the refrigerator, and set a complete table. She asked Earl to open a bottle of champagne and suggested having some cognac later. Earl questioned what they were toasting to, and Layla mentioned that it was their 10th anniversary. even though I had pointed out that it was partly due to her affair with a client's lawyer, Lila. They sat down for dinner, and afterward, they went upstairs to the bedroom. Lila cleared the dishes and put them in the sink, and then they enjoyed some fruit and cognac on the coffee table before heading into the shower. After they came out, Lila suggested she would call her parents and be all his in the meantime. Earl agreed, and she made the call. Layla, in the meantime, quickly stood up, dialed my number, and told me she wanted to congratulate me on our 10th wedding anniversary. I was puzzled and questioned why she was saying that. Layla then mentioned that she was in Earl's bedroom, not fully dressed, and he was looking at her while she spoke to me. Hurt by her words, I offered to come over and talk, believing she would understand, and I asked her not to go away. Layla burst into tears, and Earl looked confused. The bedroom door suddenly opened, and Zara's parents entered, with Zara following behind them. Layla quickly started dressing, and Zara's father asked Earl what was happening. Earl replied that they were just having a good time. Zara's mother commented on Earl's without-clotheness, and Zara firmly decided to cut him out of her life. Zara's father advised Earl to write a resignation letter, and if he messed up again, he would be fired. Layla thanked them and left. Back at her apartment, Layla realized no one was home and tried calling me but had no signal. I had nearly finished observing what was happening in the bedroom, turned off my tablet, and called Zara. She informed me that they were on their way to the landing with the kids, and she hoped to hear from me when they returned. We soon boarded the plane and headed to a different city. Our flights were well coordinated, and we eventually landed in Italy. A company representative helped us get to the hotel on the first coastline. After checking in, the kids were eager to go to the sea, visible from their window. They encountered a woman and her 7-year-old daughter who had been on the same flight. The woman had experienced motion sickness, but her daughter was eager to get to the sea. I suggested looking after her daughter so the woman could rest. Regina, the woman, introduced herself, and we made our way to the sea, following wooden ladders almost to the water's edge. There, small fish swam in the shallow water, and I even managed to catch a small crab. Afterward, we went swimming, and Regina decided to join us. Meanwhile, Earl was dealing with the issue of finding a place to live. With help from his parents, he managed to secure a one-room apartment, but struggled to find employment. He had some savings to get by, but needed to think about his future. Earl began searching for jobs in various offices, but faced challenges, as most executive positions were already filled, and he didn't want a lower-level job. Eventually, he couldn't even secure a position as an ordinary engineer. Layla spent 2 days searching for me and the children around the city, but couldn't locate us. Contrary to what my father believed, she did try calling us, and my parents explained that I had moved my belongings to their place and gone somewhere else without the kids. Layla assumed I had gone on vacation and decided to visit my office to find out more. There, she learned that I had resigned. In the evening, Layla called Earl and asked about his situation. Earl explained the meager conditions of his one-bedroom apartment and the job struggles he was facing. Layla discussed her own work situation and the establishment of a branch office, but Earl had no information about my plans. She mentioned her intention to try and reunite with her husband and kids, and the regrets about her past relationship with Earl. Earl inquired about my current situation, and Layla informed him that she was unsure of my whereabouts and my decision to leave with the kids. On that day, Lila gathered her courage and visited the cottage where Zora lived. Zora silently invited her inside, and they had a conversation in the large hall on the first floor. Lila began with an apology and asked Zora to understand her actions. She questioned why Zora continued working for their company, expressing her ignorance of Zora's history with Earl and their own relationship. Zora explained that she had not known about Lila's relationship with Earl, and they discussed their shared experiences of being deceived by him. I came to the realization that he wouldn't accept my kids, and I didn't even know where they were at the moment. Zora tried to reassure me, saying that I shouldn't worry, as my children were my husband's, and Earl couldn't have kids since he was single now. She suggested that there was no obstacle preventing us from reconciling. I responded by explaining that I had realized I didn't need him as a partner. Earl had contacted me upon learning that I was alone and asked to stay with me, but I had refused. I also shared my concern about not being able to find Jason and the kids. I mentioned that he wasn't at his parents' house, even though he had moved his things there. I knew he had gone on vacation with the kids to the sea, but I had no idea when he would return. It was almost September 1st, and the kids had school. I expressed my confusion about what to do and how to bring Jason back. Zora advised me that she couldn't assist with that and indicated that it was unlikely that Jason would forgive me and take me back today. Regina and her daughter Rose left the hotel and headed toward the center of Pizarro. After I provided a brief explanation to the children about the direction they should take, they walked ahead. Regina asked if we really needed such a detailed explanation. I responded that we did because in the city where we came from, they talked about bike lanes, but they were rarely seen. We weren't accustomed to the concept of separating pedestrian zones from cycling lanes and the areas for vehicular traffic. Here, cyclists didn't ride in pedestrian zones even if they were empty, as the locals adhered strictly to the designated lanes. We strolled leisurely through the city in the evening and eventually reached the Sphere Monument. Regina asked about the significance of the monument. I explained that it was the Sphere Grande de Pomodoro, with Arnaldo Pomodoro being the sculptor behind the monument, who happened to be a native of Pizarro. I also shared some of the city's attractions, such as its beautiful sandy beaches, pristine sea, and a stunning promenade with a long pier extending into the sea, perfect for a relaxing stroll and enjoying the waters. Regina expressed her surprise at the city's fame and Italy's rich history. Regina then asked how I knew so much, wondering if I were a history teacher. I clarified that I wasn't, but I had done some research about the places we might visit on the internet when I found out where we were going. I didn't want to be completely clueless, as it could save us from misunderstandings. Regina suggested visiting the Linate Aquarium and inquired if it was nearby. I explained that it wasn't exactly nearby, as it was in Cattolica, about 22 kilometers away, which we could reach in about half an hour. Regina agreed to the plan. I asked Regina about our plans for the next day. She mentioned that we could sleep in, since we planned to visit the Rossini Theater and explore the old town. However, the day after, we would wake up early at 7 o'clock, as we hadn't come there to sleep. I proposed grabbing breakfast on the go and assured Regina that I had the theater and old town route covered. Regina then asked where we should go next, and I suggested heading to a nearby restaurant. Regina hesitated slightly, noting that we had just had dinner. I reassured her that we would only have a little something to eat, and we headed to an open-air restaurant where the waiter handed us menus. We quickly placed our orders, with me being mindful of the children. As we enjoyed our meal, I asked Regina about her ability to travel with her young daughter despite her husband. Regina explained that she was not married and described her past relationship. She mentioned how they had never officially registered their relationship, and after their daughter Rose was born, he began distancing himself and even brought another woman home. Regina had decided to move out with her daughter and was considering returning to her mom's neighborhood. She also mentioned that her husband showed no interest in helping with their daughter, and Rose's birth certificate had a dash under father, which meant she could sue him for child support. However, Regina didn't want to do that and was determined to raise her daughter on her own. I inquired about her field of expertise, and Regina explained that she was a civil engineer. She had managed to save money for the trip by doing various jobs, including providing cost estimates for clients who needed help with their building projects. Unfortunately, the company she worked for had gone bankrupt, and she was currently technically unemployed, but remained optimistic about the future. We continued our conversation while sipping on dry Italian wine, and the children had a taste of the seafood salad. Regina mentioned that her mother lived in a nearby village, just 5 kilometers away from the city center. I shared with Regina that I had been appointed as the branch director in the city. She found it coincidental that we were both from the same hometown. After finishing our meal, we returned to our hotel late in the evening. I reminded Regina about our early start the next day to visit the aquarium. The kids asked about our plans, and I explained that we would be seeing sharks. The following day, we arrived at the Acquario de Cattolica, a popular oceanarium in Cattolica. We spent a significant amount of time observing the marine life in various pools and aquariums. Our visit even included an aquarium where visitors could touch the creatures, which brought joy to the children. After our visit, we decided to look for a place to eat outside the aquarium to avoid the higher prices. While searching for a restaurant, we spotted a bus heading back to Pizarro, so we decided to return for lunch. In around 40 minutes, we found ourselves at a familiar seaside cafe, enjoying classic Italian dishes like pasta with chicken parmesan. After our meal, we decided to hit the beach, despite the scorching sun and the city's siesta time, which made things a bit inconvenient for tourists. We returned to the hotel, grabbed our towels, and met at the reception before making our way to the beach. The children eagerly stripped down and splashed into the water, with Regina and me following suit after gathering our belongings. We spent some time in the water, watching the children excitedly chase small crabs in the shallow waves. Regina took the opportunity to ask me if that was why I was on vacation without my wife. I confided in her, explaining that I had discovered my wife was having an affair with her ex-boyfriend, who had married her for her position and money, even putting her to work with him. Regina inquired about my plans, and I revealed that I had taken what I could and moved back to my parents' house. I had decided to go on vacation with the kids, and reconciliation was not in the cards. She asked about the kids, and I explained that they would stay with me. I mentioned that in a divorce, the court typically favored the mother, so I had considered waiting until the children were 14, at which point they could decide which parent to live with. Divorce wasn't in the immediate plan, but I wouldn't be living with my wife. Regina inquired if I could handle 2 kids on my own, and I replied that I was managing. I shared a story about a guy I knew whose wife had left him with 2 girls, and when she returned 8 years later, the girls refused to let her in. They had already divorced by then. Regina asked what if my wife initiated the divorce, and I mentioned that my son Martin's opinion could be considered in court, but it wasn't the sole determining factor. She asked about my plan, and I explained that I would keep the kids hidden if needed, despite potential legal consequences. Regina questioned if the kids wanted to spend time with their mother, and I replied that it wasn't likely in the near future. Regina then asked if I would accept her offer to work at her branch, and I agreed, saying I'd like to, but needed to find a place to live, as it was challenging to find a job in my neighborhood, and I didn't want to lose my professional qualifications. Regina assured me that she would assist in finding accommodation and enrolling Rose in school. Their vacation eventually ended, and they returned home. Upon our return, I took the kids shopping for school supplies. In the afternoon, I called Samuel to discuss the branch's need for engineering and technical workers and mentioned Lila's new position. As for Earl, he had disappeared without a trace, and no one knew his whereabouts. On Sunday, I went to pick up Regina and Mary, arranging for them to stay on the second floor of my parents' house. The kids were excited to have Mary living with them, and they would all be attending school together. Regina prepared for her first day of work on Monday, while I had my responsibilities to attend to. The children still had 3 more days of vacation and stayed with my parents. Meanwhile, Lila remained completely unaware of my and the children's whereabouts. She went to work and made efforts to locate me, as she believed it was close to September 1st. She decided to visit the school, only to find out that I had transferred the children to a school in the neighborhood near my parents' home. She planned to visit them on the first Friday of September. Back at the office, there was much speculation about Earl's sudden departure and Layla's relocation. Many employees were curious about the reasons behind the leadership changes. Eventually, news of the branch's opening reached the office, and Lila also received this information. On the first Friday of September, Layla took a day off at her own expense and headed to the district center. She arrived early in the morning, armed with my parents' address, and located their house on the street. Approaching the gate, Layla observed me, along with Martin and Mary, leaving the house. They were accompanied by an unfamiliar woman and a girl about Mary's age. Unnoticed, Layla followed them and soon realized that I and the unknown woman were taking the children to school before heading to work. Observing this, Layla decided to wait for the workday to begin. Once it did, she approached the reception area where a young secretary was sorting through papers. The secretary called me and asked if I would accept a visitor, to which I agreed. Layla was then permitted to enter the office. Inside, she found me sitting at a desk covered with papers. I greeted her, and she returned the greeting. I gestured for her to sit and commented on her nice office. She thanked me and mentioned that her assistant had handled all the arrangements. Getting to the point, Layla said she was there to discuss our next steps, understanding that keeping our family together was unlikely, but emphasizing the need to work things out for the sake of our children. I agreed, expressing my desire to maintain custody of the kids while also wanting to be involved in their lives and see them. Layla conveyed her concern about not losing touch with the children, seeking assurance from me. I assured her that the kids were at school and I had plans to spend time with them, including going mushroom hunting in the woods the next day. Layla commented on Regina being my new partner, which I confirmed. She inquired if she could meet the kids, and I agreed, explaining that the children and I had planned various activities in the coming months. I requested that she give me advance notice, as our schedules were already filled. Layla mentioned that I had always enjoyed surprising people, prompting me to share that we had vacationed on the Adriatic Sea in Italy. She asked about Earl and my new phone number, to which I revealed that I hadn't changed my number. I had just turned it back on. After our conversation, Layla left the office, as per my suggestion, and went to a cafe. I then called Regina to inform her about my meeting with Layla and her request to see the children. Regina expressed her opinion that preventing a mother from seeing her children might not be wise. Regina and I discussed the situation. I explained that I didn't expect Layla to show up and was uncertain about making a decision on my own. Regina firmly expressed her decision not to interfere, emphasizing that it was a choice I had to make independently. I mentioned that I had already made up my mind a long time ago when I discovered Layla's infidelity. I stated that nothing would change that decision, as the deception had persisted for too long. Regina inquired about the time it would take to heal, and I shared that it varied from person to person, typically 3 months to a year for men and a month or two for women. During this period, some might want to return to a relationship, driven by a yearning for lost love, while others would seek a fresh start if there was no love left. Later, I decided to meet Layla at a cafe as planned. I arrived early and found Layla in a conversation with Regina, who appeared tearful. Layla assured me that I wasn't interrupting, and they had discussed arrangements for picking up the kids from school, feeding them, and taking them to the park. I asked what had transpired during their conversation. Layla explained that they talked about how Layla and I had met, and how her daughter had liked me. Regina had described me as reliable and safe, and had convinced Layla not to confront me about the children. I asked Layla if she agreed with Regina's perspective, and she nodded in agreement, acknowledging that she had grown distant from her children over the years. She expressed her remorse and explained that she had been influenced by Earl, leaving most of the childcare responsibilities to me. Layla realized she couldn't handle the kids without my help, but she understood that I wouldn't forgive her for her deceit. She also mentioned that Regina seemed to understand her better than she understood herself, and that Mary was getting along well with Regina's daughter. I asked if they were planning to eat, and Layla informed me that they were heading to the park to wait for the kids. She assured me that the children would find them there, as they often walked to the park and fed the swans. We left the cafe and went to the park, where I directed them to a bench by the water, explaining that we often walked there and fed the swans. Layla asked if the swans had flown away yet, and I told her they hadn't, but they would soon, having sent their young ones on their way. Layla then questioned why I had married her. I honestly admitted that she was not the man of my dreams, and explained that I had married her because Earl had insisted on it. I revealed that Earl's motivation was to use our marriage as a cover for his own marital issues with his wife, Zara. Layla inquired about how Earl had taken the situation, and I explained that he had been jealous but unable to take any action. Additionally, when I became pregnant, he believed the child was his, as Layla had been away for a while. It was only a year and a half later, during one of my business trips, that Layla became pregnant with Mary. I inquired whether he still believed the children were his. Layla shared that Zara had informed her that he wasn't capable of having children. She mentioned that Zara had told her the same thing when they met while she was searching for me. I questioned her about whether she believed Zara's claims. Layla responded by saying that anything was possible in life, and Zara might not be able to have her own children. She suggested I consider getting a DNA paternity test. I asked if she had taken the test herself. Layla admitted that she had, and I pressed further, asking about the results and who the father was. She confessed that she didn't know the results because she hadn't looked at them. Layla explained that she didn't care about the test results, as the children were hers, even though she had given birth to them but hadn't raised them. She had no intention of giving them up to anyone. When she asked if I was interested, I replied firmly that I was not. Eventually, Regina and I divorced Layla, and she relinquished the responsibility of raising the children to me. In court, there was no contest regarding this arrangement. 6 months later, Regina and I got married, and I adopted Rose.